He was so disgusting that, as I said in one of the lectures, I hated him with a passion. And all I can say, the hatred that I had towards him in the past is the same power, almost, as the love that I have for him now. And I would go and walk that road again if I had to. I've had death threats. Yes, I've had death threats. I've been dragged into cupboards at night, not knowing whether I'll get out of this alive or not. I've had some hair-raising experiences. I've had some interesting ones at borders. I had a rifle shoved up my nose for about 30 minutes. And every time, God has taken me out of those positions. Every single time. I've been accused of many things. They've tried to take away my credentials on numerous occasions. There were letters, there were forces put in place, there were court cases made against me. And I just leave it to God. And every single time, right up till now, God has taken me out of those positions and turned them around. Wherever I go, there are letters, don't attend those lectures, and threats. In some conferences or some divisions, threats were made that anybody who attends the lectures will be disfellowshipped immediately, and then 3,000 people pitch up. Because it's the best invitation that you could give. And if at a university you tell the students, do not attend those lectures, or else there will be certain retributive actions, there's no better advertisement that can be made. You don't tell a student that he's not supposed to do those things, because it's not going to happen that way. And why do I do this? Well, very early when we became Adventists, my wife had a dream. Well, she had two dreams. She doesn't dream a lot, but she had two dreams. I'm not a dreamer, I don't dream. But I've also had one or two dreams in my life that were significant. But the ones that she had were significant. And we thought a long time about what they meant. One of her dreams was that she was walking in a beautiful orchard. And it looked so magnificent. It was the most lovely orchard she'd ever been in, like the Garden of Eden. And there were these beautiful trees with the most beautiful flowers, and some of them had the most beautiful fruit on it that she could imagine. They looked like, almost like golden oranges. And she was walking through this beautiful orchard, looking at these beautiful trees, and she wanted to go and pluck a flower from one of the trees that was just covered in gorgeous flowers. So she plucked one of them, and as she plucked it, a serpent came out of the tree, a big, ugly, adder-type serpent, and attached itself to her hand and bit her. And she screamed in her dream. She does that often. And it's a dangerous place to be when my wife is dreaming, because you could become a target. I'm a poor bashed husband, by the way. But in any case, she screamed, and I came running in this dream and said, oh, never mind, this one can't harm you. And I took it and threw it on the ground, and it changed into a minuscule, stupid little serpent and climbed back into the tree. And then she looked at all of these trees, and she realized that the ones that had the beautiful flowers were actually overgrown by a kind of weed that had beautiful flowers, like a vine. And that the tree was completely dead, but it looked beautiful. And then she saw that some of the trees were not dead and had beautiful fruit. And then she woke up. And we thought about this and what it meant. And of course, we came to the conclusion that it is the church. It is the church. Trees are people. And the people in the church, some of them are completely dead, but they look beautiful. But when you want to associate with them, a serpent comes out and he bites you. It's part of the deal. But if you trust in God, it really can't harm you. It's like Paul who shook the serpent off and threw it into the fire. It's not going to harm you. And some of the trees were really beautiful and had a lot of fruit. Those were the good trees. So in the church we have all kinds of people. We have the good people and we have the not so good people, and we have those that look very good but are actually hiding places for a serpent. That's the church. It's been like that for as long as there has been a church on this earth. And we have to live with it. So I'm not going to leave the church because there are dead trees in it. I'm not going to leave the church because there are serpents hiding in some of the foliages. And then she had another dream. She dreamt, this was early on in our Adventism, she dreamt that we had to move into a new house. And when we came to the house, she burst into tears because the house was filthy like you cannot believe. It was the most disgusting appearance. And the house floor was full of garbage and manure and stench. And she said she can't move into this house, and she started crying in her dream. And I said, you know what? It's probably not so bad. Let's take a shovel. Here's a shovel for you, and here's a shovel for me, and let's start shoveling out the garbage. And she was crying and shoveling, and I was shoveling, and we just shoveled dirt and shoveled dirt and shoveled dirt. And eventually we came down to a floor, and when we cleaned the floor, it was made of jewels. It was the most beautiful floor that anybody had ever witnessed. It was shining. It was absolutely immaculate. And what was this house? Again, the house was the church. The church is very beautiful because the church contains all that we need to know about our Redeemer. And the church is also full of beautiful jewels, but you don't really see them because there's so much garbage. And the only way to see the beauty in the church is to shovel out the garbage. That's what we have to do. So I became a garbage shoveler. And a garbage shoveler is not exactly a very, illustrious job. And people look at you with disdain and say, is that all you can talk about, garbage? And I say, yes, I have to talk about the garbage so that you can recognize it as garbage and throw it out of your house so that you can see the beautiful jewels. And that is my evangelistic approach, removing garbage that has been thrown upon the character of God. And if we remove the garbage, then you can see Jesus Christ. Why did I hate him? Why did I hate God? Because of garbage. Isn't it right? So am I not supposed to tell people that the garbage is dimming their view of what God is really like? So call my evangelistic approach garbage shoveling. I'm happy with that. When you touch the garbage, and some people are very attached to garbage, they love garbage, whether it be music, style, or whether it be some new age philosophy, or whether it be whatever, people are attached to garbage. And if you touch their garbage, they become very, very upset. So that is the aim of my ministry. And over the years, I've realized that when you get into deep trouble on certain occasions because of what you are saying, then there are consequences which are not always positive. They're not always positive. But the outcomes are amazing. And I don't know, probably most of you know my story, but one of the incidences in my early evangelism, in fact, my very first public evangelism, was in Canada. I had been invited to go to Canada and I did a public campaign. All the other campaigns that I'd done up to that stage were in-house, in churches. In other words, preaching in churches. But this was the first public campaign, and it was in Vancouver. And the hall seated 1,260 people. I thought that was a very interesting number. Now, most of you probably know the story, but I'm going to tell it anyway, because it had a big impact on my life, and it has sustained me to this day. In this hall, there were, as I said, 1,260 seats. And they said, not one more, or they will close the place down, because the fire regulations of such a nature, I understand they're the same with you, that you shouldn't be overcrowding. And every single seat was taken, bar one. One, right in the front, on the aisle, one seat, open, every night. And I've told this story many times, but it's a nice story, so I'll tell it again. And I gave back-to-back lectures. And it went fine. When you talk about creation, evolution, you'll have the hecklers, and you'll have this and that and the other. But when you get to the basic truths, and you start talking about the real issues that our church is all about, then you get opposition. So between the lectures, there were some that were very violent, and they threatened to modify my appearance. And they were very bullish about it, so there were about 20 or 25 of them that really, they wanted to beat me up. And they were so aggressive. And I was trapped on the stage because the recordings were all in the back, the people that were with me were all in the back, and there was a huge crowd between me and them. I mean, 1,259 people. And I could never get to the back. So I was threatened by these people. And it got worse as the lectures went on because my material got worse. And then I noticed that during that first lecture, somewhere halfway through the first lecture, a little boy with Down syndrome used to walk in the front aisle, and he used to go and sit in that one vacant seat. And I looked at him and I wondered where he came from. He was very Down, and his little tongue was hanging out. And he was sort of singing like that. And he sat down, short little stocky guy, and I didn't know where he came from. And when I finished my lecture, these guys would come and they would be extremely aggressive. And then, excuse me, the little Down syndrome boy with his stubby little arms went through them and came and stood next to me and put his arms around me and his head on my breast here. And I don't know whether you've ever seen that, but it's probably almost impossible to beat someone up. There's a little Down syndrome boy hanging onto him, singing in a soft little voice. So it's a la 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 la. And so I got used to my little Down syndrome boy who was there every evening. And he would arrive sort of halfway through my first lecture. And once or twice he came late, towards the end of the lecture. And I became very attached to him, and he was my bodyguard. And I had to once lengthen my lecture because he wasn't there yet. And when he came, I'd have a sigh of relief, and then I would be able to face all of these hecklers. Anyway, this went on night after night, and we'd hired the hall for, I can't remember how many days it was, but that time came to an end, and as you normally did then, you shifted the lectures to another venue, namely the church. And anybody who was still interested then came to the church. Now the church happened to be on the other side of Vancouver. on the other side. Now I always try to find out who the little Down syndrome boy was. Who did he come with? Where were his parents? Was there a guardian? Was there anybody with him? Nobody knew him. Nobody knew where he was from. So things were much calmer in the other venue because the hecklers were gone, fortunately. But I missed my Down syndrome boy. And I was finishing up with the lecture course, and we had a number of baptisms. It was my first public campaign. I was very happy that something at least positive came out of it. And then on the last night, they were very cruel to me, those Adventists. They gave me 6 lectures in a row. In those days, I could handle that. And I had finished the last one, and in those days, you still had slides that you had to put into a cassette. And so I had to sort all my slides while all the people went out into the foyers. And on the very last day, the last lecture, halfway through the lecture, who comes down the aisle but my Down syndrome boy? And I was stunned. I looked at him and I thought, what is he doing here? How did he get here? I mean, he's got serious Downs. And this is the other side of Vancouver. There's nobody with him. How did he get here? This is not normal. And so I watched him and I finished my lecture and everybody was gone. And only he and I were in the sanctuary. And I was packing away my slides, looking at him like this and thinking to myself, who is this guy? And then he came, walked around, and little tongue was hanging out. And he came up onto the podium, and he came up to the lectern, and he came and he put his arms around me, and he sang his little song. And I was packing slides, and I looked at him, and I thought to myself, I'm gonna take courage now, and I'm gonna ask him, because this is not normal. This is not normal. So I turned around and I took him by the shoulders and I pushed him back, and I said to him, tell me the truth. Are you an angel? And he looked at me. That's what he did. And he walked away. Nobody ever saw him again. So that was very encouraging to me. And I believe that I have a little Down syndrome boy who walks with me wherever I go. So I don't worry about consequences anymore. People want to sometimes give me bodyguards. I said, I don't need a bodyguard. I've got the best bodyguard ever. And he's my little Down syndrome boy. So I just wanted to tell you that story to say that God takes care of things in amazing ways. And every time I've been in a bind, He's taken me out of the bind. I just want to wrap up by saying a few things about our truth. The truth that we believe in has cost a very heavy price. I don't think we will ever know until we get to eternity what the price of this truth was actually all about. If you go through history and you look at the Reformation, how much blood flowed just to put Jesus Christ back into the center of the gospel. How many millions of people had to die because Christ was put back into the center of the gospel? And then at the time of the Reformation, when God was uncovering truth and presenting it to the reformers, and Martin Luther recognized justification by faith, the chief principle of our religion. How other people then started discovering truth. And while Martin Luther was in hiding away at the Wartburg, where he translated the Bible, his colleagues, and one of his colleagues was Andreas Bodenstein von Karlstadt. Now Andreas Bodenstein is his name. He came from a town called Karlstadt, and so later they just called him Karlstadt. He was actually the dean of Wittenberg University. So he was Martin Luther's boss. And he kept on studying the Bible, and he recognized certain things. He recognized, for example, that the second commandment forbade idolatry. And so he gave command that while Martin Luther was hiding in the Wartburg, that all statues had to be removed from the churches. So they took them all out, but the people weren't ready for it. When Martin Luther later found out, he was very upset that he had rushed ahead and removed all the statues out of the buildings. But he did it. And then he discovered something else, and he discovered the Sabbath. And he started preaching the Sabbath, and Martin Luther nearly had a heart attack and said, Karlstadt will get us all to be Sabbath keepers. And so eventually they banned Karlstadt and threw him out. Later on, Martin Luther and Karlstadt, they reconciled. And then other people came and discovered certain things, and a group of people called the Anabaptists came into existence because they recognized adult baptism. Now, some of them were fanatics, but some of them were just plain Bible students. And they decided that they had to get rid of these people, because if you have adult baptism, then church and state cannot cooperate. Just like when you're born, you get a birth certificate. So you were baptized into the church and into the state, and they didn't want to interfere with that. So if you wanted to say that you have to be baptized as an adult on the basis of a decision that you make, well, then we'll baptize you. And that's what they did. They baptized them and kept them under the water and killed thousands upon thousands of them. But they didn't go away. And there was one particular Anabaptist. There were a number of them. The Mennonites, for example, the Amish that we have, they're all descendants of those groups. They were eventually, they came to this country, they were treated so poorly in Europe and hounded and persecuted and driven off their land. It's all been part of finding truth. And there was one, and his name was Hans Hut, which is Hans Hat, Hans Hut in German. And he discovered in the Bible the doctrine of premillennialism. And he was so excited that he went to Wittenberg to communicate his truth that he had discovered, plus, of course, adult baptism. And he was tortured terribly, not by Catholics, but by Protestants. And he died a terrible death because his cell in which they had locked him caught fire, and he was burnt to death. But then another person, another Anabaptist arose, and his name was Oswald Glate. And he dedicated his life and started preaching the Sabbath truth. And as a consequence, being an Anabaptist, they gave him his second baptism, and he was drowned. And sometimes they were killing up to 8,000 Anabaptists in a day. It's very, very pricey to discover new truth in the Bible. And of course, Martin Luther discovered the state of the dead, and William Tyndale also discovered the state of the dead. And the two people that gave us the Bible in the German language and in the English language believed in the mortality of the soul. But of course, the rest didn't believe that. And then later the Baptists were born, and they couldn't decide whether they were going to be Calvinists or whether they were going to be more evangelical, whether they were going to be Arminians, so they started fighting amongst each other about that issue. But they had certain truths that they discovered. And then came the Methodists, and they said, hang on, you know what? The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. We have to live differently. We have to clean up our act. We have to live healthily. So they drove the cattle through their meetings, dragged old Wesley through the roads, beat him up. And eventually, when the doors opened and it was possible for them to escape the terrible persecutions, they came to a land of the free. And here they all were, all of these strange religions, And all of those orthodox ones that never moved further than their founders sort of were left in a trail. And so the largest religions turned out to be the Methodists and the Baptists. And the Baptists split up into Seventh-day Baptists, Calvinistic Baptists, and General Baptists. So they never really agreed on what they believed. And then there were other groups, like a Christian group that just called themselves the Christian Church, to which, amongst others, Joshua Himes and James White belonged. And they believed in the state of the dead being a state of sleep. And then came the Great Awakening and the Millerite movement, and God was going to gather the jewels of truth that had been scattered through all these various strange denominations, and he gathered them into one group. And they discovered not only the Sabbath, not because they were so great, but because Rachel Oakes came to them and said, you know, if you want to keep the law, you've got to keep the Sabbath. She was a Seventh-day Baptist. And Ellen White and her family grew up in the Methodist Church, and they realized that the body was the temple of the Holy Spirit. So the health message was sort of ingrained in that as well. And then the Christian Connection, to which Joshua Himes and James White belonged, they said, you know what? When you're dead, you're sleeping. And all of these truths came into one single denomination. And this denomination is called Laodicea. It's got a lot of garbage in it these days, and we all need to have shovels. And it's got a lot of dead trees in it that look beautiful, that have a sting in it. But you know what? This is God's church. There are beautiful trees with fruit in it as well. And I don't read of anything coming after Laodicea. It's the last one. And I don't read that I will take your candlestick away and give it to someone else. I read, if you don't buy from me gold refined in the fire, I'm going to spit you out. There's no coming out of this church. There's only a spitting out. And I'm not a spitter. God is the spitter. I'm a shoveler. So that is what I want to encourage you with. We're going to go through tough times. Forget about the serpents in the trees. Look at this fruit. Look at the fruit. Judge it by the fruit. Is it from God or is it not from God? I don't care what they say about me. If I see a person that was an atheist give his life to God and go through the waters of baptism and come and suffer with me in this church, why should I suffer alone in this church? And how many dogs do we have that stand outside the church and bark? And bark and bark and bark at the church? Or say, the general conference is at fault, or the union is at fault, or the conference is at fault. They all belong to the church. They have good fish and they have bad fish. They have good trees and they've got bad trees. So where is the true church? Is it those that define themselves as the true church, that have separated themselves from this body? This is it. This is the last church that's going through to the kingdom, whether we like it or not. But not everybody in it is going through to the kingdom, and let's just accept that. But this is where the truth is. This is where the truth is. This is the body that has collected and collated all those truths that were paid for at such a heavy price. This is where it collectively is. There is no other church that has the collective truth that this church has. And I'm not going to run, because Jesus never ran. He died being part of that church. And so, as we wait for the final events to take place, let's take courage. There are good trees in this church. And whether there are few or whether there are many, that's not my business. That's God's business. So that's what I wanted to encourage you with. This is God's church. Stay the course. He's coming soon. Amen. Now let's... Oh, I went a little over, sorry.
You're fine. Thank you so much. A couple of practical announcements. If anyone is going to be leaving this area, please do not use the glass doors. Our buildings are built where this is a funnel and the wind is blowing, and some of the doors will actually bend off the hinges. We've had it happen. So whenever you do leave, if you go out the lobby and carefully go out the doors that kind of fold against the wind, that'll be better. Did that make sense? Yeah, we've got quite a storm coming through. We'll take some questions now. Justin will pass around the mic. Pastor Ross and I have learned we want to get as many